first and foremost by U.S. military.
Welcome back to Disclosure Team. I'm your host, Vinnie Adams. The following is an interview with Avi Loeb. In this interview, we discuss the Sol Foundation, David Grusch. We look back at Avi's expedition to Papua New Guinea earlier in 2023. And we also talk about what we're likely to expect from the Galileo Project in 2024. If you enjoy this content, please take a second to hit that like button, subscribe, comment, and share it with your friends. I really appreciate it. I hope you enjoy this interview with Avi Loeb. Well, Avi, it's wonderful to see you as always, and Happy New Year.
Thank you. Happy New Year. Hopefully full of discoveries.
I hope so, indeed. Yes. Now, Avi, back in November, I believe you attended the inaugural Sol Foundation conference. And I just wondered if you could kind of tell us what it was like and if anything really stood out to you from it.
Well, there was a large variety of talks, some of which were about scientific results, some of which about policy, and others about implications for society of finding and other civilizations. So it was a mix. And as far as I'm concerned, the most exciting, of course, things to wait for involve scientific data that we can use to learn more about our cosmic neighborhood. So, there was some expectation that perhaps the US government will establish in the defense bill a new organization that will bring disclosure to things the government knows. But unfortunately, this did not materialize. At the end, we are still in the dark as to what the government really knows, what kind of materials might be in possession of organizations outside the government as well. And, for me, it's really important because I plan to dedicate the coming years to perhaps find anything we can find in the sky or in the oceans that would inform us about objects that arrived close to Earth from outside the solar system. And if the government already has such evidence, it would save me a lot of time. So I'm really curious to know, and I think it should not be privy of the US government to keep this information away from everyone else, because if it came from outside the solar system, it involves humanity. It's information that we all need to know about. It has nothing to do with rivalries among nations, and so my hope is that we will learn more on whether the government has something in the coming months or years. But because if they know something that would take me a while to figure out, I would rather see it now and help them figure it out. It's a scientific topic. It's not so much a defense-related topic. And my hope is that we will learn more in the coming months and years.
Absolutely. I completely agree. And, when I put out onto social media that I was going to be interviewing you, so many people were very eager for me to follow up on your thoughts now on the testimony of David Grusch. I believe it said that you had a good conversation with him, and if that's kind of changed your views at all.
Yeah, so I had a conversation that lasted for more than an hour, and I was encouraging him to provide more details that could potentially help us figure out what the government knows. But he said that he cannot really do that because it can put him in jail. And so, unfortunately, I haven't seen any. I mean, what he mentioned are things that were in the public domain previously, and of course, they are not conclusive enough for us to analyze scientifically. There is no data that I can use to figure out what really he's talking about. And if there are materials, the claim is that they are held in places that we have no access to. So what I really would would love to have is access to materials or information the government may have on things that lie outside the solar system, because they should not be the privy of government officials. They have to do with humanity as a whole. Such information is obviously scientific, and we can help government figure it out. And if it exists, I would like to see it in the open. The fundamental question is, what exists out there that is currently classified that we are not aware of? He says there is such information, but I haven't had access to it. So altogether, I'm very curious to find out what he knows about, because he did not reveal those details, and we do not have the full amendment that was added to the defense bill that was supposed to reveal some of this information through a committee assigned for the task. And instead, there is no board, and we are still at the mercy of agencies that may decide to keep it to themselves.
Hey guys, just a quick interruption from this interview. I just want to give a shout out and a recommendation for you guys to go and check out my good friends at Calling All Beings. DJ, Nathan and Deb put out some incredible content on their channel. I've popped the link in the description of this video for their channel as well as their social media pages. Please go and show them some love and check it out. You'll really enjoy it. Right, let's get back to the interview with Avi Loeb. Yeah, absolutely. I mean, just sticking with the Sol Foundation, you are on the advisory board. So could you just give us kind of brief breakdown of what your role may entail sort of in the coming months and even years?
Right. So my hope is, of course, that there will be some new information that will come from government. But if not, I'm committed to lead the Galileo Project and to analyze all the data that we collect. We currently have an observatory at Harvard University that is working 24/7. And for the past few months, we collected data on about 100,000 objects in the sky. We are currently analyzing it, trying to see if we notice anything unusual, any unidentified object. So far, we haven't found any, but we will continue to do so, and then build copies of this observatory, put them in many different locations. So obviously, it would save us a lot of time if the government were to provide us with the information it has, because its day job is to monitor the sky for national security purposes. And astronomers in the past monitored a small piece of the sky and looked at very distant sources. So they ignored objects near Earth that are of interest in this kind of a study. So, we are embarking on a relatively virgin territory here of looking at the entire sky for objects near Earth that are not human-made and not natural in origin. And, there was no systematic study of this type. And so even if we get the upper limits on the occurrence rates of things that are unidentified, not human-made or not natural, that would be a new contribution. And so we already have a few months worth of data within the Galileo Project from one site. We plan to establish additional observatories and make progress. But if the government already has some interesting data, then I would like to know about it. And of course, we went also to the Pacific Ocean in search for the materials from the first interstellar meteor that we identified with my student Amir Siraj. And we collected materials altogether, 850 spherules, tiny droplets less than a millimeter in size. And we are currently finishing the analysis. And we identified a special type of spherules never discussed before in the scientific literature. It has a composition that is different from rocks on Earth, the Moon, Mars, or asteroids that were known before. And potentially, these are extrasolar in origin that came from outside the solar system. But we can't really tell whether it's a natural object or artificial in origin, because we have only the molten droplets from this meteor. And so we are starting to plan the next expedition where we will seek bigger pieces that could inform us about the original meteor and perhaps whether it was just a rock or an artificial object. And we hope to get the funding. We will need funding at a higher level than we had for the previous expedition. This will probably be $4 million in cost, because we are planning to build a much better instrumentation, including an ROV, a vehicle that would survey the floor of the ocean at a depth of more than a mile in that location. So this will be a more ambitious mission. And first we have to get funded and then build the machinery and go there. So the Galileo project is going along different routes. One is to look at objects in the sky, another one to study the interstellar meteor, the first one from a decade ago. And actually the 10-year anniversary is coming up in a week. And then the final would be to look for new objects that pass near Earth, that do not collide with Earth, that came from outside the solar system. And we all know about the Oumuamua, the first object that was discovered in October 2017. And there is a new observatory called the Rubin Observatory that will start operations in Chile and release data in 2025. And we are developing the software to seek objects like Oumuamua. And it's possible that it will find every month such an object, because it's much more sensitive. And it has a camera of 3.2 billion pixels that will survey the southern sky every 4 days. And potentially it's much more sensitive than any other telescope that was doing such surveys in the past. And we hope to find more objects like Oumuamua. And this time around, we'll try to get more data on each of them and figure out whether they're natural or artificial in origin.
Yeah, I mean, that's exciting stuff. And just sticking with IM-1, I've been following the story, the whole time. And I did remember a few months ago, there was some not maybe pushback or some differences of opinions on what the materials were. I mean, could you just kind of give us an overview of the controversy there?
Well, the controversy was generated by people who do not have access to the spherols. So basically, we found altogether 850 molten droplets. And most of them came from other sources, nothing to do with the meteor that we were after. And we know that because by now we identified the different types of spherols. We went through all of them. We are about to summarize our results starting within a month or so from now, when we finish all the analysis. And we found a special type of spherols never seen before, never discussed in the scientific literature, that has a high abundance of some elements like lanthanum, beryllium, uranium. We call it Belau type spherols because it was never discussed before in the literature. But we have altogether 60 elements from the periodic table that we measured the abundances of. And it does look like an abundance pattern that is quite new. And the closest are samples from the moon. But the likelihood of getting materials from the moon is very small. Only 1 in 1,000 meteors originate from lunar origin. So it's really quite interesting that we found this special type. And some people claim that it may be coal ash, that based on 3 elements, they argued maybe it's actually human-made and not from another origin. And when we looked at the 60 elements, we could easily tell that it's not coal ash, it cannot be human-made. And so we demonstrated that this argument carries no value. And of course, there are people who try to criticize, but they don't have access to the materials. So it's a non-professional for them to do to argue this way. And I'm really surprised that they are so. I mean, one of them even wrote a whole preprint trying to criticize the analysis we are doing, even though they had no access to the materials. And we are doing a very methodical work here that took us by now 6 months. So we are really investing a lot of time and effort, while other people are just making statements, sitting on their chair with no access to the materials. I find that very strange. I mean, that they can make arguments, without doing the work, because science is really all about the evidence. And so we will detail the results in the coming months, and hopefully everyone can see them. And then all of the data that we will bring out is based on spherules, tiny, less than a millimeter in size, the size of a grain of sand. And therefore, the best we can say is what was the composition of the original object. But some of the elements, for example, were lost in the airburst, in the explosion within the atmosphere. And so we wish in the next expedition to find bigger pieces that will inform us about the structure of the original object and all the elements that it contained. And that could reveal whether it was a rock or an artificial object, quite in a straightforward fashion. And so that's what we will aim to in the next year, trying to learn more. But as of now, we can tell, what kind of droplets melted off the object, because we found them near the path of this meteor. And of course, going again will allow us to search nearby areas more carefully and make sure that we don't find the same materials elsewhere.
Yeah. I mean, looking even further into the future, do you have any plans to search for IM2, which is the other object off the coast of Portugal?
Right. That will be the next mission for us. There, the challenge is, I mean, we were considering doing that first before going back again to IM1. And the issue is that the ocean depth is 5 kilometers at the location of IM2. And moreover, the terrain is more challenging. It's more rocky. And so for now, we decided to go back to IM1, and because we know the location, we have some information about where the unusual spherules were found, so we know where to look for bigger pieces. And then in the future, we hope to go to look for IM2. And hopefully there will be more meteors of interstellar origin as time goes on, and we hope to find more. Of course, the minimum amount of new knowledge that we can gain is about rocks that come from other stars. And that by itself is already an extremely important research area, because it will be the first time that we analyze materials that came from planetary systems different than our own. And it's not at all clear that most of the material ejected from such systems is the same that we find in the solar system. So, for example, I wrote a scientific paper with a postdoc of mine, Morgan McLeod, talking about the most common stars, which are dwarf stars. And they are about 1/10 of the size of the sun and 1/10 of the mass of the sun. So altogether, they are 100 times denser than the sun, because their volume is 1,000 times smaller than the sun, and they have 10% of the mass of the sun. So these objects, these stars that are the most common stars, dwarf stars, they actually are able to break stone or rocks because they are denser than rocks. Okay, while the sun is unable to do that gravitationally because it's not dense enough. If you bring the Earth, very close to the sun, I mean, it will just heat up, but it will not be broken by gravity. Whereas if you bring the Earth close to a dwarf star, it would be torn apart by the tide raised on the Earth. And so we calculated that the most common stars, dwarf stars, if planets like the Earth are kicked close to them, they would be torn apart, these planets, they would be spaghettified into a stream of rocks. And half of the mass of the planet, when it's disrupted, will get ejected to interstellar space at a very high speed of about 60 kilometers per second, very high speed, which is actually quite similar to the speed of IM1. So this could be a potential origin for IM1. But the planet, when it gets close to the star, also gets heated up to a very high temperature such that the rocks on the surface of the planet melt. And as a result, some elements sink to the center of the planet where they find iron, the iron core, and other elements are left behind in the crust. And those are the elements that we find most abundant in the Belau spheres that we found. So that could be an origin for them, because the crust of the planet would be ejected to the highest speed by the tide raised by the dwarf star. So, at the very least, we learn about very unusual environments near the most common stars, because most of the objects in interstellar space originate there. But we might also find spacecraft among those rocks, and that's the hope. And we are exploring a new frontier. This was not done before, and I think that's what makes our study exciting. But however, there are many people who try to criticize it, first because they do not believe that IM1 was interstellar, that it came from another star, because they don't believe the US government data. And the thing is, the US Space Command looked back at their data and confirmed that indeed IM1 came from outside the solar system. But those other astronomers just dismiss that claim, which is very strange, because the US Space Command has bigger funding than NASA, and they took time out of their busy schedule to check the data on IM1 and confirm that it came from outside the solar system. But the other issue is that they also have a problem with considering the possibility that we are being visited. And I just find that to be lack of imagination, because if a cave dweller finds a cell phone, of course the argument would be that it must be a rock. And when those astronomers tried to fit the data on IM1, they said we cannot fit the data. It has too high material strength and also too high of a speed. If we lower the speed by a factor of 3, we might be able to fit the data. Well, but that's not optional. Data is not optional. And even if the object was natural in origin, it could have a very high material strength, just because it originated from molten rock on a planet that was disrupted by a dwarf star, as I mentioned before. So altogether, I think we should be open-minded. We should explore, the interstellar objects without any prejudice. And I just don't understand why some astronomers resist the possibility that we might have technological objects out there, because we are sending 5 of them, to interstellar space. They were launched over the past 50 years. So to me, it sounds completely plausible that you could have one of these technological gadgets collide with a planet like the Earth once per decade, if enough of them are out there.
Yeah, absolutely. And let's talk about the sort of sensor suite that you initially set up on the roof of the university. And am I right in saying that has now moved to an alternate location?
Yeah, we moved it to a better location where we can observe the sky better. And It's still on Harvard property. And over the past few months, we collected the continuous data on the sky, and we are currently analyzing it with machine learning software. And the hope is that we might either find unidentified objects, and now those objects will be observed with scientific instruments that are fully calibrated and under control, and we can analyze them with machine learning software. So it will be scientific quality data. Or alternatively, if we don't find any unidentified objects, if we identify all of them as being birds or human-made drones, balloons, airplanes, in that case, we also get some valuable information, because we can set an upper limit on the rate of UAPs per volume that we surveyed, looking out to a few miles in distance over the period of time that we conducted the survey. And that kind of a constraint was never derived in the scientific literature. We only have accidental detection of objects, UAPs, reported by either civilians or military personnel. And these anecdotal reports do not tell us how frequently such things are, because there was never a systematic study over such a long period of time, of months. So at the very least, we'll be able to limit the appearance of unidentified objects within the Boston area, Boston, Massachusetts. And we are in the process of making a copy of that observatory and placing it in Colorado. And then depending on funding, if we get more funding, then we can place more observatories in many other places. And each observatory costs about $500,000. So the more funding we get, the more such copies we can place, and the more data we can get on independent geographical locations. And so, one approach is to wait for the government to inform us on what they have, but another would be for us to look at the sky, which is not classified, search the oceans, which are not classified, and find the answer ourselves. Of course, I would be delighted if the government came forward and told us what they have, what they know, because it would save me time, possibly decades, because the government was looking at the sky for very long, and it's part of national security, and they might have found things that are of interest. So I really hope that if they have materials or information, that they would share it with scientists like myself, because if something came from outside the solar system, it should not be the privy of government. It's supposed to be information that is shared by all humans, just like anything we know about the cosmos. And we can help the government figure it out. And I don't think there should be any concern about affecting, stability of society or considerations of that type, because, if you look at history, for example, the fact that the Earth is not at the center of the universe initially was controversial, and the church did not want this breaking news to be heard, so they put Galileo in house arrest. But in retrospect, it serves us well now in the space age, where we are able to reach Mars just because we realize that Mars doesn't move around the Earth. Okay, and we know that we know how to calculate its orbit and get to there, knowing the laws of gravity, and so altogether, adapting to the reality that we all share, is really important for us to move forward. And I would really very much like to know whether we have a cosmic neighbor, because we better learn from that neighbor if that neighbor is far more advanced than we are, or at least adapt to the idea that neighbor exists. That would serve us well in the future. And so the question is whether the government has any substantive data. And of course, we heard the testimony of David Grusch in summer 2023 about it. However, no direct evidence was released and shared with in a way that would be fully convincing. He was just talking about indirectly about conversations he had. And I had a Zoom meeting with him for more than an hour last month. And unfortunately, he cannot share the details of what he knows. And so, without those details, I cannot really assess what the government has. And I had a few people from Washington, D.C. visiting my office for some discussion, general discussion. One of them was used to be a high-level official at Lockheed Martin, and I brought up the question, is there any truth in your opinion to what David Grusch is saying? And I expected him to dismiss it altogether. And instead he said, well, it may not be wrong. So, maybe there is something out there. Unfortunately, I had no access to direct information, so I cannot really say anything. And it's really confusing hearing people talk about something that you have no direct confirmation of. Obviously you can believe it, but that doesn't help us much, because I want to have first knowledge of what it entails and then try to analyze it scientifically. And so that's the hope. If the government has something, that they would see the light at some point and share it with scientists like myself. It will save me decades of my time searching for the evidence myself or through the Galileo Project. This way, I will be happy to help government figure it out and move forward. Because if anyone reached us by now before we reached them, they are likely to be far more advanced than we are, and therefore we can learn from them. I see it as an opportunity for us to grow, to reach a higher level of technology and science. And it's not a threat whatsoever. It's just an opportunity for us to learn, just like having a smarter kid in the class.
Yeah, I mean, it'd be great to see more sort of collaboration between the government and the scientific community. But given the sort of national security implications of UAP, how can scientists, researchers kind of collaborate with government agencies, but while maintaining scientific independence and integrity?
Well, the simplest is if the government releases data without any restrictions, any classification. And that can be done in principle if the data is clearly unrelated to human-made objects by adversarial countries. So if you have a puzzling object that you are confident cannot have been produced by other nations, then I think it should be shared with scientists so that we can figure it out. Now, I don't know firsthand that the government has such data because I haven't seen it. And it's not a matter of some military personnel saying that they saw something. It's more about either materials or scientific quality data taken by multiple instruments. So my hope is if government has such data, that they would share it scientifically. And so far, the All Domain Anomaly Resolution Office in the Pentagon just argued that they can identify 97% of the objects that they looked at from the past. There are a few percent that they are not sure about. But the point of the matter is that it must be a mixed bag. There must be a lot of human-made objects in the sky or natural objects. What we really care about is the small minority of objects that could be from outside of this Earth. And even if it's 1 in 1,000 or 1 in 1,000,000, just finding that one would have great consequences for the future of humanity. So that's what we are after, the small minority. And obviously the government wants, to figure out whether any of these objects is from an adversarial country. So for them, if there is 1 in 1,000 that looks really strange, it's not really necessarily a national security threat if it's so rare and it behaves in ways that they cannot relate to any other nation. However, for me as a scientist, that's exactly the type of thing that I find not so boring. Anything that is human-made is quite boring as far as I'm concerned. So our goals are complementary relative to government, and I very much hope that we can work together if there is anything that is outside of this earth.
Yeah, and I mean, if any of this kind of collaboration does come into effect for the Galileo project, how will you maintain full control, let's say? Because I think there's fear out there that once the government or the intelligence community get their hands on something, that they seem to kind of take control of it. If you see what I mean, I think there's some worry there that people might.
So that there could be two. The question is, why would the government do that? So far, I should say that so far, my direct interactions with the government were quite supportive. For example, with respect to the Meteor, the U.S. Space Command looked at their data, confirmed it, and encouraged us to go there. And so that was quite helpful. With respect to the Galileo project, I had visits from representatives of Aero where, they encouraged us to continue doing the work. So altogether, the feedback was positive. But my hope is if they do have access to interesting materials or information that, we can work together in a scientific way. If it has no implications for national security because it was produced somewhere else or came from another place, let's figure it out. It's actually a puzzle that we should aim to understand. And I think at present, it could actually bring salvation to humanity, because right now, when we look around, in the daily news, most of our concerns are about humans engaged in conflicts and fighting each other. There are 2 wars right now. And if we happen to figure out that we are not alone, that there is a cosmic neighbor out there, perhaps, it will change our perspective and remind us that we should work together as equal members of the human species. That's my hope. And so I really, my New Year's resolution is, of course, to survey the sky, survey the oceans, and try to see if there's any evidence for a cosmic neighbor. And also, hope that the government, if they have any such data, will share it with scientists like myself. I will be delighted to help them figure it out.
Excellent. I'm just going to read a few questions here for that people have submitted. The first one is from Chris Spitzer, and he says, have you come up with a list of technological and energy markers for when you're searching for these objects, and are flight characteristics included in both techno and energy markers?
Yeah, of course. So when we survey the sky, for example, we are training our machine learning algorithms on familiar objects that, like drones, airplanes, birds, and the more data we use to train those algorithms, the better are they at finding out such objects. And so the question is whether there is anything else. And so far, we have not found anything else. We are still working on it. But, the more data we get as months pass by, the better we are at identifying anything that doesn't resemble common objects. And it's really all about rare objects. I mean, it's a mixed bag. Most of the objects we see are just well known, and as long as our AI algorithms are, as long as they are trained well enough, they will be able to filter out all the familiar objects. It's challenging because the way an object appears depends on its size, distance, illumination by the sun, time of the day, its shape. So even a particular object, may look differently, different times of the day, different orientations, different distance. So at the end, the hope is that it will not be humans that classify the objects, but our machine learning algorithm software. And also we are analyzing the trajectories and trying to figure out. So if we have a good distance measurement, then we can tell the speed of the object, the velocity by which it moves. So that obviously requires multiple sensors separated from each other, just like we have two eyes that inform us about the distance of an object from us. And so we hope that as we get better and have more instruments, that we will have good distance estimates. We will measure not only the images in the visible light, but also in infrared and sound. We will measure the sound and a radio signature. We are doing it now, but it takes time to train our algorithms and study it. And it's really important to do it systematically, because all the reports coming from government are anecdotal. That there were military personnel that happened to be at the right place at the right time, and they just saw something. We don't know how frequently such a thing is, because to do that, you need a systematic study at that location over a long period of time. That's what we are doing with our observatories. We have one functioning right now, a second one that we are about to assemble in Colorado. So the first one is at Harvard, near Boston. And then more observatories will be installed depending on the funding that we get in the coming months and years.
And, let's say the funding does come, and that's great. How would you decide these geographical locations? Would you be willing to consider what we'd call known UFO hotspots, maybe say Catalina Island, Skinwalker Ranch, locations like that?
Definitely. So that would be, we have obviously looked at reports, and we will respond to that. So to do that well, we need more funding, but we will definitely go to places where unusual reports came.
That's wonderful to hear. I've got another question here from, it's an anonymous one. What are Avi's thoughts on the potential existence of alien megastructures such as Dyson Spheres and the search for their evidence in our galaxy or further?
Right. So in the past, there were studies looking for the infrared radiation from such spheres, because they convert the illumination from the central star to emission from a much larger surface area and therefore lower temperature. So the same luminosity is coming out, but instead of it being in the visible band or depending on the star, of course, it's shifted towards the infrared long wavelengths, because the surface area of the Dyson sphere is much greater and it absorbs the energy coming from the star. So in the past, people just looked for that emission. And another thing to keep in mind is that the star is changing its brightness, of course, as it evolves. And if you think about the engineering of a Dyson sphere, it's very difficult to make them as part of a rigid structure. So the most practical approach would be to use light sails that just hover over the star, where the radiation pressure outwards is balanced by gravity. So you have these floating pieces of the Dyson sphere, and you just put these tiles together to cover the sky around the star. That idea came forward by Robert Forward. One thing to keep in mind is, if you have those sails, basically like solar sails that are kept in position by the starlight balancing gravity, that in fact the output from the star changes over time. So eventually, when the star becomes brighter towards the end of its life, it would break apart the Dyson sphere. And what that would do is send out pieces of a broken Dyson sphere into space. That could also happen, if the Dyson sphere is in place for billions of years and there are asteroids damaging it and breaking it. And the bottom line is you would get, because those pieces were floating, it's very easy to eject them out of the planetary system because they were not bound to the star. They were just, the force of gravity was balanced by radiation pressure to start with, and now you break them and kick them, either because of an impact by an asteroid or because the star becomes brighter, so then they're pushed out of the system. And in that case, you will end up in interstellar space with pieces of a broken Dyson sphere. And I suggested in a paper that maybe one of these pieces is Oumuamua. Maybe that's why we found an interstellar object that had a very extreme shape and was pushed away from the sun, potentially because of radiation pressure from the sun. So it's a completely new way of searching for Dyson spheres by looking for their broken pieces rather than just by the radiation that they emit. But so far, we haven't seen clear evidence for them. And perhaps the Webb telescope can give us some interesting limits.
Yeah. And you mentioned Oumuamua there. And, is there any further research that can be done on that object that hasn't been done already, now that it's actually kind of left and can't be sort of re-seen or picked up on sensors?
Yes, unfortunately, Oumuamua now is too faint for us to see it. It's tens of millions of times fainter than it was close to Earth, and our telescopes cannot pick it up. And some people suggested that we might want to chase it and send a mission. Unfortunately, it's moving very fast, but a bigger obstacle is that if you want to chase it, you need to see it, you need to find it, and therefore you need to equip any such mission with a telescope that will be large enough to notice Oumuamua. The brightness from an object, the flux that you receive, declines inversely with the fourth power of its distance from the sun, because the amount of sunlight that it intercepts drops inversely with distance squared, and then the flux that you see from its surface drops with another factor of 1 over distance squared. So altogether, it's 1 over distance to the fourth. So it fades very quickly, and by now it will be really challenging to identify it, even from Earth, but not to speak about a space mission that would go after it. It's really impossible to equip it with a big enough telescope such that it would see Oumuamua. And you really need to see it because we don't have an accurate enough measurement of its trajectory to tell us where it should be. And there are so many more rocks. There are 1,000 times more rocks that belong to the solar system compared to Oumuamua. So I think it's hopeless to go after it. But instead of doing that, we should find new objects like it with the Rubin Observatory that will come into play, that will start operations in 2025. It's equipped with a 3.2 billion pixel camera that will survey the southern sky every 4 days. And given that it's a large telescope, much bigger than Pan-STARRS that discovered Oumuamua, one expects there to be at least one detection per month if such objects are on random trajectories. So we could find more of the same rather than obsess with the one that was discovered in 2017. And maybe we'll find a new population of objects that are weird like Oumuamua, and by observing them more carefully this time around, we can figure out their nature.
And will the data be shared from this new observatory with the scientific community?
So this telescope was funded by the National Science Foundation, and the data will be public as soon as it's collected. And so together with my postdocs, we developed software that would identify interstellar objects. To our surprise, the scientists involved in the Rubin Observatory, it's also called the LSST survey, the Large Synoptic Survey Telescope. So the people involved in that did not really focus on finding interstellar objects. So we had to develop our software, and we are pretty much ready now, waiting for the data to come in within a year or so. And obviously, we will report any interstellar object that we identify, and then one could look at it with other telescopes. So, for example, the Webb telescope, looking at an interstellar object like Oumuamua, could measure the surface temperature of the object, and in addition to the reflected sunlight, it could measure the infrared radiation, because it's an infrared telescope emitted by this object. So from that we can tell how big it is, because we would see how much flux it's emitting. We will measure its surface temperature. There will be much more information. And we can also tell if there is any evaporation, because the Webb telescope is far more sensitive than the Spitzer Space Telescope that was looking for any evaporation of Oumuamua. So altogether, we will have much better data on future objects like Oumuamua, and we would be able to tell their nature. And my hope is that by looking at many of them, we could ascertain as to whether it's a mixed bag of objects of different types, or maybe some of them are artificial. So I'm very excited. It's all about evidence, and people have opinions, but the beauty of science is that if you open your mind, you can actually learn something new.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, listen, Avi, before I let you go, I just want to sort of ask, where is the best place for people to see, once you've done the final analysis on the IM1 spherules, where will people be able to kind of find that data and those conclusions?
Yeah, so I provide updates on the research on medium.com. So you can subscribe for free and get updates, all my essays. Every few days I post an essay there, Avi Loeb at medium.com. There is a subscription for free there. And of course, there will be a scientific paper that will report about all the data. And it should come out, we hope to complete it within the coming months. And then it will go through peer review and eventually be available for the public to read and look at the results that we get. And then we hope to go on the next expedition to look for bigger pieces of the original object that could inform us whether it was natural, like a rock, or artificial in origin, because an artificial technological object would have potentially buttons on it, and we can decide whether to press one of them.
That's fantastic. Well, listen, Avi, I'll make sure that the link to your Medium articles is in the description of this video. But it's always a pleasure to speak to you, Avi. Thank you so much for joining me today.
Thanks for having me.
No problem. Take care, and we'll see you soon.
Bye-bye.
Goodbye.